Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir daf mem hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Amy Goldstein in loving memory of her dear mother, Carolyn Barnett Goldstein, Chaya Bat Mordechai V'Chana on her 4th year at side. I love and miss you. Your love of Judaism, art, music lives on in all of your family. Today's daf is sponsored by Yiskan Shal Weisband in memory of Menachem Yunitz Menakoin Ben Esther Vitzvi. Today's daf is sponsored by Medina Korn in memory of Mrs. Deborah Cohen, Deborah Brian Abata, Rav Yaakov Zundel, V'Toy Ba'alta, whose 10th year at site was this week. Mrs. Cohen was a student of Sarah Schneer in Poland, as well as a beloved and revered teacher in Boston's Maimonides School for over 40 years. Her warmth and wisdom inspired generations of children and endeared her to all who knew her. Yehi Zechla Baruch. We're going to get started now with our Gemara. So we're going to go back and clarify some things from the end of yesterday's daf. Amar Abaye. So we saw Abaye says here, Eshkachtina, we got a little bit off topic, which we're going to get right back on topic. We're going to compare it to the Nazir. But first, Abaye says, I heard the Chaverim, the friends of Rabbanit and Barushaya, who were sitting and saying the following halach. But before we start, let me just give you some background of our nice map that we might be familiar with from earlier Masechta. Okay, so we have here, sorry, I'm using the Hebrew one. I just have a better version of the Hebrew. So here's the entrance to the Ezrat Nashim. If you notice on the south, right, south is at the top. It's a little weird on this map, but south is at the top. Nothing to do about that. You enter from the east, and you have the Lishkat Nazirim over here. This is where the action is going to happen. You see that circle? That's going to be where the shlamim is cooked up. Okay, in this dud, where we're going to put the dud is the pot. Under the fire, we put the hair of the Nazir. Okay, that's going to come up later in today's daf. This whole area of the Ezrat Nashim, like the rest of Abaye, is all considered what we call the Machane Leviyah, which was compared to the Machane Leviyah, where the Leviim lived in the time of the desert. Okay, that's a place where Zav is not allowed to go. Zav can't be in the Machane Leviyah. A Tamimate, when it becomes impure to a dead body, is allowed to be in the Machane Leviyah. Even we're going to see in a minute, a dead body is allowed to be in Machane Leviyah. Okay, in the Mitzorah can't be, if you remember, in the Machane Shechina, which, okay, Machane Shechina is from here. This is Shar Nicanor, the gate that enters into, there's a small space, sorry, that's why I just show this. Small space called the Ezrat Yisrael, and then from there we get to the Ezrat Kohanim. There's the altar, there's the ohel, where everything is. Okay, so I'm clarifying things from yesterday that I wasn't so clear about, which is that we have these three areas. The Machane Leviyah basically is all of Abaye, all the Temple Mount, up until the gate of Nicanor, which enters into the Ezrat Yisrael and the Kohanim. Okay, as opposed to the Ezrat Nashim, by the way, the Ezrat Nashim is not where the women stood. This is where the women were allowed to go up until that point. But it was used for all sorts of things. There were those four corners. Each one was this different lishka. There's one that's for the Mitzoraim, the lepers. There's one that's for the, if you remember, they have to get their ears and their toes sprinkled, and they stand right near the entrance to the azara, but they can't actually go in because what we're going to talk about today, when you're mechusar kipurim, when you haven't yet done your sacrifices, you're not allowed in to the azara. You're not allowed beyond Shar Nicanor. Now, Shar Nicanor is this entrance to the azara, the entrance to the Machane Shechina, and it's also known in the time of the tabernacle in the Mishkan as Petach ohel moed. Okay, this all relates to Parshat Shavuot. We've been dealing with the Mishkan and the building of the Mishkan. That's the entrance to the ohel moed, which had in it again the altar, and then all the inner things where the heichal was, where you had the menorah, the shulchan, and the inner altar. So comes these rabbis that Abaye hears, and they said the following: because it said by a zav. Now a zav again, he has to. So the zav can't be a Machane Leviyah at all. So when does he get to go into the Machane Leviyah and stand Petach ohel moed? It says only on the 8th day. So from there they say, oh, on the 8th day he can go to Shar Nicanor, which is in the Machane Leviyah, which must mean only on the 8th day, only after he's already done his tefillah, right? He went into the mikvah. So they say, what they say here is, we assume he has to be done with his 7th day. And let's say he pushed up his 7th day to the 8th day and only did the tefillah on day number 8. He wouldn't be able to go into the Machane Leviyah and bring his sacrifices because it says only after you finish all that, then on the next day after the sun set. To which Abaye says, how could you possibly say this? Because the exact same pasuk appears by the Nazir. And it can't possibly be that the Nazir can't go and stand Petach ohel moed on day 8 if he hasn't gone to the mikvah, or on day 7 in the morning after he went to the mikvah, because we'll see in a minute. So that's what we saw yesterday. By Nazir Tameh, it says, Hevio Tam el Petachol Moed, which is the sacrifices, which sound you would say the same thing. On day number 8, you can only go into the entrance of all moed once you're finished with dunking in the mikveh the day before and the sun setting. That's what you would say, right? Is that what you're going to say? No way, no how. Where is Shiur Nicanor? B'Sharei Leviyah. It's in the Levite camp. Vahatanya, and doesn't it say in a Braita, and this is what I told you before, what's the problem with the Nazir going into Machaneh Leviyah? Well, theoretically, the problem would be because he's impure, and that's why he needs to go to the mikveh, and that's why he needs to wait till Harev Shemesh. But that's not true, because his type of tumah, you're allowed in the Machaneh Leviyah. We're going to see that right now. It's meimei mutar l'kanes b'Machaneh Leviyah. If you're impure to a dead body, you're allowed to go into Machaneh Leviyah. You just can't go past Shiur Nicanor. But the whole time you're tamei, forget about you went to the mikveh and you're waiting for the sunset. Even before that, you can go. And not only that, even the dead body itself is allowed to be there. Okay, if you had a dead body in Abaye, that's not a problem. That's Machaneh Leviyah. There's dead bodies. That's fine. Shenemal, because remember, Mitzora can't be in any camp, right? That's why they get totally ostracized. Zav can't be in the Machaneh Yisrael. But a Tmei is allowed to be in all the Machanot, just not the Machaneh Shechina, which is, again, that inner part beyond Shiur Nicanor. So basically, they say, how do we know that the Meid Atzmo? Shenemal, v'yikach Moshe et atzmot Yosef imo. Moshe took the bones of Joseph with him. What does it mean with him? My imo b'mechitzato. It was with him wherever he slept, right? Where he lived. Where did Moshe live? Imo b'machaneh Leviyah. He lived in the Levite camp. When we talk about the camps in the desert, it was where they lived, right? The Shechina was the Mishkan. Outside of that was where the Leviim lived. They surrounded the camp. And then after that, around that was all of Yisrael. So basically, from there we learn, and if you haven't read Flashback yet this week, you can read it about the bones of Yosef and about these machanot. Anyway, that's Abaye's question. He says, your drasha on that pasuk makes no sense. You want to say a zav has to, right, who basically hasn't done Harev Shemesh, which then, by the way, and this is, I didn't say this right yesterday, this would include 2 types of zavim. Remember I said there's zav bal riyachat, sees one. Then he's just tummy for the night, definitely not referring to him. But then there's 2 where he has to wait 7 clean days, and go to the mikvah on day 7 and wait for Harev Shemesh. And then there's 3 times where he then needs to also bring a sacrifice on day 8. Now, according to those rabbis, any zav, it sounds like they're saying, who needs 7 clean days, so a zav with 2 sightings or 3, would not be able to go into the Machaneh Leviyah until Harev Shemesh. Okay, because it has nothing to do with sacrifices, even though the pasuk was about sacrifices. It really, according to them, it has nothing to do with sacrifice. It has to do with your 7 clean days are not over until they're completely over and the day ends. So, and again, you need a mikvah and sunset. So if you pushed it off another day, you'd be stuck. You wouldn't be able to go into Machaneh Leviyah until. Comes Abaye and he disagrees with that one point. He says, no. Ela amar Abaye, tvul yom shel zav kizav dami. A tvul yom of a zav is like a zav, but afilu hachi kevan de mechusar kapara lo ayim. But what's the reason he can't go into Machaneh Leviyah? Not because, and then not a Baal Shtei Re'iyot who just has to wait for Harev Shemesh. It's because he's got 2 things going for him. Number 1, he hasn't had Harev Shemesh. Number 2, he's what's called mechusar kipurim. He hasn't brought his sacrifices yet. Those 2 things together cause him not to be allowed to go. Okay? So now they say, why is it called ohel moed? Why do they say he goes petach ohel moed? So they say, L'meimra ma hata mechusar kapara lo ayil, af l'machaneh leviyah nami mechusar kapara lo ayil. They want you to say that just like the mechusar kapara can't go into the azara, okay, can't go into ohel moed, likewise, a mechusar kapara who also hasn't done full yom, right, can't even go into the Machaneh Leviyah. So it's coming to teach you that until Harev Shemesh, you can't go into the Machaneh Leviyah if you still need to bring sacrifices. So you have 2 things against you. You have an issue. And where do we learn it from? Where do we learn? 1 second, I forgot this question. Hataminalan is. Second. No, okay, let's read it and then we'll get what the question is. Titania. Right. This is how do we get that these are the two things that are issues and that these things prevent you from going into the Machaneh Leviyah. So here we bring a pasuk where it says that you can't, okay, this is talking about Tumat Meid. Anyone who touches a maid, velo yitchata, and doesn't purify themselves, et mishkan Hashem timei, he will desecrate the mishkan. V'nichrita nefeshim Yisrael. Why? Kimeni dalos alakala, because you haven't sprinkled the paraduma waters. This is, by the way, in the paraduma section in Parshat Chukah. Tamei yihiyeh od tumato bono. You might notice there's a lot of redundancy in this pasuk. It adds at the end because you're tamei, which you already knew that, and od tumato bo, your tumah is still upon you. So obviously they must be referring to different things. So what does it come to teach you? Tamei yihiyeh is a tvul yom, and od tumato bo is a mechusar kapara. So when you have those two things, that's what's preventing you from being able to go into the Machaneh Leviyah. Okay. Tiglachat atara ketza. So now we want to know, Mishnah starts with, we started in the Mishnah on the previous page, how do you do the tiglachat tum'ah? Right, you did it on the seventh day, and then remember, and then you, if you did it b'shmini, right, would it work? And all that, you bring the korbanot that day, or not? Okay, now we have tiglachat atara ketza. So how do you do it when you're pure? Hayam mevi shalosh behemot. You bring three animals, hatat, olah, ushlamim. Now it sounds like you bring them in that order, but the commentaries aren't really going to understand it that way. We'll talk about that in a minute. You bring three. You bring a kivsa, a she-goat, for, a female sheep for a chatat, a sin offering. You bring a keves for olah. You bring a male sheep for an olah. And for shlamim, you bring a ram, an ayil shlamim. A ram is actually a mature sheep, a male sheep. Okay, you end up with, you have the first two sheep, the male and the female, are within its first year of life, and the ram is within its second year. Okay, it's a mature sheep. So now they say, when do you do the tiglach? So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you do it after you slaughter the shlamim. So now there's a bit of a question, because there's a bit of a debate about how to understand this Mishnah. So if you read the Psukim, you look in Bamidbar, chapter 6, it says, Hikriva Kohen Lifnei Hashem. The Kohen brings the korbanot. Asat chatato ve'et olato. The way the simple reading of the Mishnah is chatat, olah, and then it says shlamim. Ve'et aliyah says zevach shlamim with the sal matzot. Remember, you bring these matzot. V'asat Kohen, you bring 20 loaves, matzot and rikikim. V'asa Kohen et minchato ve'et nisko, and then he brings the mincha. Okay, that we're not going to get into. V'gilach Nazir petach ol moed et rosh nizro, and then it says he does the shave. So the simple reading of this Mishnah is you do and it's like the simple reading of the verses chatat, olah, shlamim, and then shave. But for some reason there seems to be a debate, and the commentaries, many of them actually say that you do shlamim first, according to this opinion, and that Rabbi Yehuda is saying because the shlamim's first, that's the one you do the shaving on, because you're going to see the next opinion in a second, and then you'll see Rabbi Elazar Omer, lo hayam galech ela ala chatat. You would do it on the chatat, shachatat kodemet b'chol makom. Because anytime you have a chatat and other offerings brought together, you always bring the chatat first. And therefore, here you must also bring the chatat first. So there you can see that it seems like they're arguing about which one goes first. Okay, although it's not exactly clear, and there's a bit of a debate about how to understand the first opinion here. Is it that you do the shlamim last and then bring the korban on the, and it seems like there's another debate within this. It seems like you slaughter the animal, then you shave, and then you finish the rest of, the sprinkling of the blood. But most of the commentaries say, no, it's after the sprinkling of the blood of the shlamim, even though it's not what it sounds like, according to the simple reading of this Mishnah. So there's a lot of lack of clarity here exactly about this first opinion. The second opinion is pretty clear. You do it after the korban katan, and presumably after you sprinkle the blood. But even though they have this debate, which one do you do it? Do you do it with the shlamim or do you do it with the chatat? Either which way, they both agree that if b'diavad, you already did it some other way, it's fine. Rashbag says, and this is a different thing, remember this, you have three animals you designate, but you didn't say which one was which, right? So since we already know that each goat is each sheep is very specific, which one it goes for, Haruya l'chatat tikrav chatat, right? If it's the female, it goes chatat. Lo'olah tikrav olah, the male becomes a male offering, and l'shlamim, the older one, tikrav shlamim. It's obvious which goes to which. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're going to have a whole drasha to try to explain this issue. Particularly, we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda first. It says here, Gilach Nazir petach ohel moed. Okay, and the question is, where does this shaving take place? So if you read the psukim, what would you say? Petach ohel moed is basically where. Okay, so again, what did we say? Going to our middle. Petach ohel moed would be basically right at Sha'ar Nicanor, going into where we call Ezra Yisrael. That's petach ohel moed. That's the parallel in the tabernacle to the opening to the ohel moed, which housed again the altar, the outer altar, and then the inner altar, and the shulchan and the menorah. But this Braita says, "V'gilach Nazir petach ohel moed v'gomer b'shlamim hakachuv medaber." Here's the source for Rabbi Yehuda. He says, petach ohel moed is a catchphrase to tell you do it with the shlamim. How do we know that? What does petach ohel moed have to do with the shlamim? Shenema, you look in Sefer Vayikra when it talks about the korbanot shlamim. Right, there are all sections there. It talks about the olah and the shlamim, each of these korbanot. Ushchato petach ohel moed. You slaughter it by the entrance of ohel moed, which really means actually inside ohel moed. But what they say is, that must be saying, Ushchato petach ohel moed means you slaughter it, V'gilach Nazir petach ohel moed means you shave your hair while you're when you finish dealing with the shlamim, okay, or when you begin, right, depending on whether you slaughter it, right, it has to somehow connect with the slaughtering of the shlamim, which was done at the entrance of ohel moed. So now the Braita, in its classic Midrash Halacha style, says, are you sure? Right? You're saying it's talking about shlamim? Maybe it really means actually do it in the entrance of the ohel moed by Sha'ar Nicanor, or stand there and shave your hair. Marita, so Braita says, of course not. In ken derech bizayonhu. Could you imagine getting a haircut right in Sha'ar Nicanor? We all know what a mess a haircut makes. Start shaving up your hair. There's hair all over the place. It's disgusting to do that right at the entrance to ohel moed, to the most sanctified place. Okay, it's not Kodesh Kodeshim, but it's pretty close. You're going to stand there and you're going to do it? Of course not. That's a ridiculous idea. So according to the first opinion, we basically say petach ohel moed is a catchphrase to tell you do it with the shlamim, which was also slaughtered petach ohel moed. You do it when you slaughter the shlamim. And really, it doesn't mean, obviously, that that's where you slaughter it, where you cut your hair, because that would be an embarrassment. Now we're going to have a slew of opinions that learn it from other places. Why it's clear that it's not petach ohel moed is talking about a location. What they basically mean is petach ohel moed does not mean a place. It means kind of a time, or not exactly a time in the day, but a time to connect it with when you're doing something else. Shlamim, that's when you do it. So now we're going to say, Rabbi Yoshia, in this Braita, Rabbi Yoshia comes and disagrees and says, you don't need to say it's derech bizayon. He doesn't like this derech bizayon answer, because the derech bizayon answer is a logical answer. We're always better off if we can prove it from a verse rather than logic. So he says, Harei amra Torah lo ta'aleh b'ma'alot hamizbechi. Right? Don't make steps going up to the altar. Remember, there's a big ramp. Why is there a ramp? Because when the Kohanim have these wide pants, and you might, while they're going up the steps, you might see under their pants, you'll see their private parts. That will be an embarrassment. Will be inappropriate. So since you have that verse that says that would be inappropriate, obviously shaving your hair would be inappropriate as well. Okay, so it's agreeing, right? Kal v'chomer l'derech bizayon. If you can't even have steps going up because maybe you'll get to erva, of course, something that would be disgraceful, like shaving your hair right over there, would be a real disgrace. Obviously, that would be. So he's agreeing that it's derech bizayon. He's just saying, I have a better proof for you because here's a verse that shows anything that's embarrassing or, degrading can't be done in the temple. Now we skip all this part in parentheses. Okay, parentheses means this really was a mistake, probably. It doesn't really seem to belong. It's kind of like a bit of a repeat of what we saw before. It doesn't add anything. We're going to skip it. Third answer. Okay, so we have derech bizayon. We have derech bizayon with a pasuk that proves it. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, you know something? You don't even need that. I have a better answer. Forget bizayon at all. I have another answer why it's clear from the psukim that it's not done at Sha'ar Nicanor, at the Nicanor gate. It's done where? In the Lishkat HaNazirim. Okay, the Lishkat HaNazirim is on the southeastern side. Okay, remember, the east is where you come in from. You come in from the east, and right there in the Ezrat Nashim, there are these four, what they call Lishkot, okay, 4 chambers, and the chamber of the Nazirim is on the southwest, on the southeast side. So it's right when you walk in, it's farthest from Shiur Nicanor, right? Because it's on the east side and Shiur Nicanor is toward the west as you go west. So they now say the following. It says in the Pasuk, what are you supposed to do with the hair? You take the hair of your nizirut, v'natan al esh, and you put it on the fire. Now notice the verbs here. What are you supposed to do? Take the hair and put it on the fire. Now where's the fire? In the Lishkat Nazirim. That's why I told you that circle there. That's an indicator of where they would put this fire. Now, what do you learn from here? Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, and you bring it to there. Many times in the Psukim, they tell you, you bring something here. Okay? So, mechusar ela lekicha nitina. It would have to be that you only are missing what? Taking it in your hands and putting it there, which would mean you'd have to be in the Lishkat Nazirim. Yatsa who's excluded from here? If you were to do it at Shiur Nicanor, you'd have to go back to the Lishkat Nazirim. You'd have to bring the hair to a place. You'd have to take it, bring it, and put it under the fire. That's not what the pasuk says. It doesn't say bring it. Okay? Like by the blood, for example, it says you have to bring it. You have to bring it to, right? There's a whole process. One of the 4 main avodot is holacha, walking it over to the altar. Here it doesn't say anything like that. So it must be from there you can prove. Forget the bizayon answer. It's just you need to be in the Lishkat Nazirim to burn it. And it seems to say you take your hair and you burn it right after you cut your hair. So it must be you're supposed to be there and not in Petach moed. If you're in Petach moed, if you had to be in Petach moed, you'd have to bring it. Here it seems, we're going to see later, theoretically, your hair could have been shaved off somewhere else. But the point is, we can't force you to be in a place where it would require you to bring the hair. You could theoretically shave it somewhere else and then bring it. But we can't tell you have to be Petach moed, and then that would require bringing, because then the Pesach would have told you you have to bring it. So now they say, right? So therefore, that's Ikad Amri. Some people say that there's a different version of Rabbi Yitzchak. This is just a bit of a different version about how he said what he said, but the content is exactly the same. In the end, he says the same thing. So don't think, oh, what's the difference here? It's just a different style of speech. According to this version, Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, B'shlamim HaKatuv Medaber. Okay, so again, according to this, he says, Petach moed means shlamim, like we saw in the very first line of the Gemara. And then again, it's going to be, you mean it means shlamim? Maybe it means Petach moed. Talmud Lomar, the reason is, and here comes exactly what he said before. You take the hair, so the place where you did it, that's where you would do the shave. Now we have a different explanation of this pasuk Petach moed. This is different. This isn't to say that you don't do a Petach moed, but it's to say, what does it mean Petach moed? Or maybe it does mean you don't do it there, but it means something else entirely. Nazir Petach moed, it's actually telling you a time. When are you allowed to shave your hair? When Petach moed. What does it mean when Petach moed? Petach moed patuach eno megalech. You can only do it when the Petach moed is open. Okay, when is the ohel moed open? Meaning, when do you open Shiur Nicanor? Every morning they would unlock it. It was a key, they would unlock it, and then they would lock it at night. So basically, this means the only time you can shave is during the daytime, which makes sense because it goes with the sacrifice, and sacrifices can only be done during the day. So that's just a different drasha on how to understand Petach moed. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri, he's the only one who seems to disagree with this, and he actually thinks Petach moed is the place, and you do shave right there at Shiur Nicanor, unless Nazir Petach moed v'lo nizira, just not a woman. Why not a woman? Turning now to Amud Bet. Shema yitgaru b'perchei kehuna. What happens with the woman? The woman has to uncover her hair, obviously, to shave her hair. You might be thinking of sota. Hold on, we're going to get there in a second. She uncovers her hair, and then they shave it off. That would cause the kohanim, interesting, right? To maybe be attracted to her. That would be inappropriate. It's not the right place to do this. Now, it's kind of funny because she's shaving her hair a second later, which is not exactly the most attractive thing. Anyway, they're worried that when she uncovers her hair, they might have thoughts looking at this woman, and that will be a problematic. Like, this isn't the right place for it. Amrulo lidvarecha sota. So they say, what about the sota? The sota will prove this, because the sota, we do this. What does it say? Dichtiba behemida lifnei Hashem. What's lifnei Hashem? Right before the machaneh Shechina. Right? You do it lifnei Hashem. Below chayshinan shema yitgaru b'perchei kehuna. And we're not worried about people looking at her and being attracted to her. Amar lahen, very interesting answer. Zo kochelet upokeset, zo ena pochelet upokeset. The Nazira comes into the temple all made up, makeup, decked out. Okay, now it doesn't mean she has to, but it means that she can. A Sota woman, if you remember, the whole thing is they want to lindavelota. They want to make her look disgraceful. This is a woman who committed adultery, possibly. Okay, again, not necessarily, and we're going to talk all about this when we get to Sota. But there's the whole idea is to disgrace her. So if she's being disgraced, she can't show up with makeup on and looking all beautiful. So we're not worried that anyone's going to be attracted to her, even if we uncover her hair. Whereas a Nazira theoretically could come all made up. And, could you imagine you're going to the temple, right? You might want to get dressed in your finest. And so because of that, there's more of a concern, and we don't want to uncover her hair right there in front of everybody. So because of that, we don't do a tvul moed. But this is the one opinion that says that a regular Nazir would do it. And he's not concerned about the bizayon, and he's not concerned with, it's missing hava'ah. No, he doesn't relate to that whole drasha. And he thinks that you would. Okay, so we saw a whole bunch of different options about, interestingly, the Gemara didn't go much into this debate about the shlamim and the chatat, right? And why the chatat particularly, right? Now, he does say it's because the chatat always comes first, and therefore we're assuming you shave on the first one, but we don't have more than that. Moving on to the next mission. Now, what do you do with your hair once you cut it? So you take your hair, and you put it under the pot where there's a fire going, cooking up this meat from the shlamim. You're putting it under the shlamim. The shlamim has rules. The shlamim is called kodshim kalim. There's kodshim kalim. There's different rules for the meats of those things. The shlamim is the most lenient because it's eaten by the owners, as opposed to the chatat and the asham, for example, that are eaten only by kohanim. And then you have where they can be eaten. So kodshim have to be eaten in the Abaye, whereas kodshim kalim can be eaten in all Yerushalayim. But because you're putting this under the fire that's going on the shlamim, it still can only be eaten in Yerushalayim. And therefore your hair, according to this opinion, we're going to have 3 different opinions. In the Mishnah, they bring 2. Later, we'll see when we end this section, we're going to have a 3rd opinion. If you shave b'medina means outside Jerusalem. So if you shave somewhere else, not in Jerusalem, you can't put it under the fire because it has to be like the shlamim, which can only be in Jerusalem. Which is this talking about? So tiglach ha'tahara, it sounds like anywhere you shave it, as long as it's in Yerushalayim, you put it under the dud. If it's outside Yerushalayim, you can't. According to this opinion, you wouldn't put it under the dud. It's only with the shlamim. The shlamim is only in a tiglach ha'tahara. You don't bring a shlamim. Instead of the shlamim, you have an asham in the other one. Rabbi Meir Omer, hakom shachim tachat adud chutz min ha'tamesha b'medina bilvad. He says, no. Any hair goes under the dud. Tme'ah, tahara. The only one that doesn't is a tameh whose hair was cut outside Jerusalem. But if it was a tiglach tahara for the end of your process, and you did it outside Jerusalem, you could still bring it under the dud. And if it was tme'ah and you did it in Jerusalem, you could still put it under the dud. Only one that doesn't. Okay, so we have 2 opinions. There's basically 4 options. Tum'ah and tahara, 2 options, and within each one, there's in Jerusalem and outside Jerusalem. So the first opinion says only tahara in Jerusalem goes under the dud. And the second says everything goes under the dud except tum'ah outside Jerusalem. And then we'll see an in between that I'll already tell you distinguishes between tum'ah and tahara. Tum'ah anywhere doesn't go, and tahara everywhere goes. Okay, it doesn't matter where you shave. Notel sa'al rosh nizro. So now the Gemara is going to talk about this, how you take the hair and you put it under the fire, and now we're going to learn another detail about it. Tanu Rabbanit. But in a Braita it says, "Va'achar kach notel et harotev." Then you take some, after you shave your hair, you take some of the gravy from the meat that's cooking. V'noten al sa'al rosh nizro, and you put it on your hair. U'mishalech tachat adud shel shlamim. Sounds a little disgusting, but you put a little gravy on and you put it under the fire. V'im shilach tachat adud shel chatat v'asham yatsa. And if, by the way, you didn't put it under the shlamim, but you put it under the chatat or the asham, it would work as well. Now, there's something a little strange here because the asham isn't brought at the same time as the shlamim, right? The asham is brought if it's tameh, the shlamim is brought if it's tahor, and then it seems like if you did it under the asham, it would be okay. Well, what else would you put it under in the, right? It sounds like the chatat or the asham, it definitely doesn't go into the ohel because there is no dude cooking food. A dud is a pot. There's no, or a cauldron. There's no pot cooking meat for the ola because all the ola meat goes up to the heavens. So there's a whole question about what we mean by this asham and how is b'diavad if that's the only option for the tiglach hatuma. I'm going to leave that question aside. There's some answers given, but there's a bit of a question asked about that here. But basically what we learn here is two halachot, and now we're going to see where we learn it from. Number one, we have the gravy gets burned with it. Number two, we have this issue of the, even though it's supposed to be by the shlamim, as the pasuk says, if you did it with another sacrifice where there's meat cooking, like the chatat or the asham, it's okay. Remember, the chatat and the asham, the meat's only eaten by the kohen, but still you cook the meat and somebody eats it. So now they say, asham benazir tahor mi'ika. So first they question, what do you mean? Instead of the shlamim, you put it under the asham? There is no such thing as asham by a nazir tahor. So what are you talking about? What he says is this is what it means. Im nazir tamem shalach tachar adud shel asham yatsa. What it means is what we thought it meant, which is if you're doing the process of the asham tameh, the nazir tameh, and you have an asham and you put it under that, then it's fine as well. So now they say, minanimile. Where do we get these halachot from? The rotev and the chatat and the asham. Amar Rava, Amar Kha. First, we're going to learn the rotev, the sauce, the gravy. Asher tachat zevach hashlamim. Now, it should have just said asher tachat hashlamim. You put it in the dud, right? That's under the shlamim, right? The fire that's under the shlamim. Why does it say zevach? To say mi zivcho yehe taktav. Part of the zevach has to be underneath the fire, in the fire as well. Not just your hair, but you have to take from part of the zevach. So meaning, what are you going to take? You're not going to stick a piece of meat underneath. The meat's supposed to be eaten. You're going to take from the gravy. And what about the second halacha? That if you did it under the chatat or the asham, it's just missing here. Yatsa, my timer. Amakra zevach l'rabot et hachatat ve'asham. Because it adds this word zevach, it comes to teach you other sacrifices as well, like the chatat and the asham. So now the obvious question, how can you learn two things from one word? Didn't we just learn zevach to teach you the gravy? How can we also say that it's also coming to teach you about the other sacrifices? So our classic answer, im kain lemakra, could have said, merotev hashlamim, could have said from the rotev, from the gravy. So my zevach, the fact that it uses that word zevach, it adds an extra word, that means rotev, and it also says zevach, that means chatat v'asham, to which they're not so satisfied with this answer. Once you have zevach, l'rabot chatat v'asham, maybe that's the only thing that word is coming to teach you. And then you wouldn't say it should have said rotev because it was not talking about that. So just the word zevach could be simply coming to tell you only chatat and asham. Im kain lema shlamim v'zevach. If you wanted to say, put it under the shlamim, but if you put it under something else, it would work as well. You could have said, put it under shlamim v'zevach and some other sacrifice. And you would obviously know that halacha. My zevach hashlamim, from the fact that you connect it to the word shlamim, and it's called zevach shlamim, comes to teach you also from the zevach, also something has to go on. And then shma min hatarta, you can learn both. That's not the most convincing answer, but they, a bit of a kvetch, but they say in the end, you can learn two things from that pasuk. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're back. I told you we're going to see three opinions. So now of what we saw in the Mishnah, which hair goes under, in which shaving, and where did you shave your hair? So we'll repeat the ones we saw before, and we'll add another opinion. Everything gets burned, other than the impure Nazir who shaved their hair outside the temple. Because his hair is supposed to be buried. Divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay, this is Rabbi Meir. This we saw in our Mishnah. Rabbi Meir was at the end, the last opinion we saw. Only the tameh that was outside, every other hair goes in. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Tehorim kan v'kan hayu meshachim. Anywhere you shave your hair, if you're in Nazir tahor, it doesn't matter where you shave your head. You could have been in Tiberia, I don't know, shave your head there, bring it to Jerusalem and burn. Tmeim kan v'kan lo hayu meshachim. And it never says anything about putting the hair under the dud. First of all, it's the shlamim, which doesn't appear in the tiglach hatuma. And it never says anything about in the psukim about the korbanot of the tameh. So you wouldn't put it at all. It doesn't matter where you shave. You don't put it and burn it. Hachamim oblim He has the most limited opinion. It's the tahor only. And it has to be that it was done in mikdash, which really means in Jerusalem, because that's the way it's supposed to be done. And only when it's done properly does it go under the fire. New Mishnah, with this we'll finish. So now continuing in the process, you now cook these shlamim, or you sholkan, which means you cook them for a very long time. Now you take this cooked arm or leg, one of the legs, and you take that. You take chalat matzah achat menasal, rikik matzah achat. So there's these chalot matzot and there's rikikei matzot, and you take those and noten al kapei hanazir minifam. You put them in the hands of the Nazir and you wave them. We talked about that there's waving in certain sacrifices. You wave them. This, by the way, is all explicitly in the psukim. And after you finish that entire process, the Nazir now is free to do as he or she pleases. Okay, they no longer have any of the prohibitions. But we'll just continue to the next stop because kind of mid-issue. Rabbi Shimon omer, kevan shenizrak alav echad min adamim, hu tal hanazir l'shtot b'yayin u'litamei l'metim. I didn't want you to be stuck in that one opinion. Just know that there's another opinion. Rabbi Shimon says, no, as soon as you sprinkle the blood of one of the sacrifices, you don't have to finish this entire process that we just described. Already, the Nazir can drink wine and become impure to dead people. Okay, we've seen this before, and we'll see this further, this whole opinion about it. Okay, and with that, we finished our daf. So let's do a quick summary. We started with the issue of the zav and these two opinions. Is a zav tvul yom not allowed to go into the machaneh leviyah? To which we said only if he's a tvul yom and mechusar kipurim, he can't go into the machaneh leviyah. If he's just a tvul yom, he actually could go in. So if he's a zav bal shtei reiyot who doesn't have to bring a korban, he's actually allowed at that point to go to har Abaye. Okay, and that was learned out from the right. Basically, Abaye disproved their point from the psukim by a Nazir who can clearly go into machaneh leviyah because there's no problem for Nazir shenitma and Nazir became impure. There's no problem for any tmei to be in the machaneh leviyah, and yet it says go to petach moed, so you can't learn it from there. And therefore, we learned it from somewhere else about these two things, right? That was the menahane mile. Where do we learn? Or my time, I forgot what the question was. Hatam minalan. Where do we learn that you can't? It's two things that you need, and that's because of the tameiyah and od tumatobo comes to show you those two things. Then we have this tiglach hatara. You bring these three animals. You do. Is it the shlamim first or the chatat first, and then you do the tiglachat on the first one, right? Or maybe there's some way to read the Mishnah that the shlamim is last and you do the tiglachat at the end. And then we saw psukim to prove because it says ohel moed is where you do the shaving. Can't really be ohel moed, which we showed for all sorts of various reasons. Bizayon, a pasuk about bizayon. We saw it's missing hava'ah, right? You would obviously do it in the lishkat nizirim where you're supposed to put it on the fire because it's supposed to be right next to it. And then we saw some other explanations of what petach moed means. Maybe it has to be open, or maybe just women can't do a petach moed, but the men actually do. That's what we saw in the Gemara there. And then we talked about tachat adud, and we saw three opinions. Which ones go tachat adud? Is it only Nazir Tahara where you shaved in Jerusalem? Was it only not a Nazir Tameh that was done outside? Or was it all Nazirut Tahara, you put it under the dud, and all Nazirut Tum'ah, you don't put it under the dud at all? And then we saw, obviously, not according to the opinions that exclude the Nazirut Tum'ah, but we saw that two drashot on this word zevach. We learned how we could get two things from the word zevach. The number one, you put from the rotev, the sauce, onto the hair and burn it with the sauce on the hair. And also or the gravy, also if you did it with a different sacrifice, the meat was cooking and you didn't put it under the shlamim, you put it under the chata or the asham, it would work as well, even though it's not the ideal halacha. And then we had this last issue of the hanafa, which we started to talk about, and this machloket about when you actually are permitted. Is it after the entire process, even after the hanafa? Now, again, you need the three sacrifices, the shaving the hair, putting the hair on the fire, and the sauce in the fire, and then taking out this zra, one of the legs, and the one of the matzot, one of the rikikim, and doing this waving. Then the Nazir is permitted. Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's rekat dam with one sacrifice, you're already done. Okay, once you got atonement from one sacrifice, you've already finished your process, which is an interesting thought, because what's that whole idea of 3 sacrifices, right? Here it seems to be saying one is enough for the basics, okay? Meaning the others are like cherry at the top or something like that. Again, not exactly, but that the basic thing is done when you already do one of the sacrifices. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a great day.